The year was 1862, and the wide, open plains of the American West stretched out in all directions, untamed and wild. The land was beautiful but harsh, unforgiving to those who didn't know how to live with it. Samuel Barrett, a rancher who had worked the land for over 20 years, knew this better than anyone. He was a tall, strong man in his late 30s with weathered skin from long hours under the hot sun. His ranch, one of the largest in the area, was his pride and joy, built from hard work, sweat, and a deep love for the land. The ranch was located on the edge of the New Mexico territory, not far from the Apache hunting grounds. Samuel's cattle roamed freely across the vast landscape. But this freedom came with a price. There was always tension between the settlers and the Native American tribes. The Apaches, once peaceful, had been pushed into war by the white settlers moving onto their land. Now every day felt like a delicate balance. Samuel knew that the Apache were not to be underestimated, yet he also knew that peace was better than conflict, if only it could be kept. It was a hot afternoon, the kind where the sun burned down mercilessly, and even the wind felt like it was carrying heat from an oven. Samuel was riding along the edge of his land, checking the cattle, making sure they hadn't wandered too far off into dangerous territory. The cattle were his livelihood, and losing them would mean disaster. But that day something felt different. As Samuel rode near a patch of grass that stretched toward the hills, he saw movement in the distance, figures on horseback coming toward him. His heart sank, for he immediately recognized the way they rode. They were Apache. Samuel's first instinct was to turn back and retreat into the safety of his ranch. The Apache were known to raid ranches and settlements, stealing cattle and causing trouble. But he also knew that the Apache were just like the settlers in one way. They were trying to survive. They were people who had lost their homes, their families, their way of life. And Samuel didn't believe in fighting unless it was absolutely necessary. The riders drew closer, and Samuel saw that there were only 4 of them. His grip tightened around the reins of his horse as he prepared for what might come next. The Apache were not known for being patient with settlers who crossed their path. But as the riders approached, one figure separated from the group. A young girl, no older than 18, rode toward Samuel. Her features were sharp and beautiful, with long dark hair flowing behind her as she rode. She was dressed in the traditional Apache clothing, leather, beads, and a long flowing skirt. But it was her eyes that caught Samuel's attention. They were dark and full of determination, yet there was a hint of sadness in them as well. The girl halted her horse before Samuel, looking up at him. Her posture was strong, but there was a softness to her presence that Samuel hadn't expected. He had been ready to face an angry warrior, but instead, he was faced with a girl who appeared desperate. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Samuel didn't know what to do. It was rare for the Apache to approach a rancher without some kind of reason, and he wasn't sure if this was a trap or if she was just passing through. But the silence stretched too long, and the tension in the air grew thick. Finally, the girl spoke, her voice steady but tinged with something else, something Samuel couldn't quite place. "I need your help," she said, her words soft but clear. "Please." Samuel stared at her in surprise. "Help?" The Apache didn't ask for help from settlers. If anything, they were usually the ones who gave nothing but trouble. "What do you mean?" Samuel asked, his voice cautious. The girl's eyes dropped to the ground for a brief moment before meeting his again. There was a look of urgency in them now. She leaned slightly forward as if what she was about to say was something important, something that could change everything. "They have taken him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who?" Samuel asked, his brow furrowing. The girl swallowed, then spoke again a little louder. "My brother. The Comanches have taken him." Samuel's eyes narrowed. The Comanches were a dangerous tribe, feared by many and known for their raids. But why would the Apache be asking for help from a settler in this situation? There had to be more to the story. "Why come to me?" Samuel asked, his voice a little more skeptical now. "I'm no friend to the Apache. You know that?" The girl didn't flinch at his words. Instead, she nodded slowly, as if she had expected this reaction. "I know, but you are the only one who can help. You have cattle. You have a ranch. You know the land better than anyone. You have something the Comanches want." Samuel's heart beat faster now. He had an uneasy feeling about this entire situation, but he couldn't deny that something about the girl's plea touched him. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She lifted her chin and there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. I need your help to get him back. The Comanches are holding him. I know where they are keeping him, but we can't do it alone. Please come with me. Samuel hesitated. There was no telling what kind of trouble this would bring, especially since he had never been involved with the Apache in any serious way before. And yet, in the back of his mind, he couldn't ignore the fact that there was something genuine in the girl's eyes, something that spoke of desperation, of fear for a loved one. He looked at the other Apache riders who were waiting some distance away. They were silent, watching him, waiting for his decision. Samuel felt the weight of the moment hanging over him. He had always lived by his principles, believing in self-reliance and avoiding entanglements with the tribes. But here in front of him was a young girl asking for help. She wasn't asking for a fight. She wasn't asking for war. She was asking for something different, a chance to save her brother. Samuel took a deep breath, his decision still unclear. But for the first time in a long while, something inside him stirred. It wasn't just about the cattle. It wasn't just about his ranch. It was about doing what was right. Maybe this was his chance to break the cycle of hatred and mistrust between the settlers and the Apache. Maybe this was his moment to do something that mattered. I'll help you, Samuel said finally, his voice firm. But we do this my way. I won't risk my ranch or my people. Understand? The girl nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. Thank you, she said, her voice filled with relief. I'll lead the way. We leave now. Samuel followed her, unsure of what the future would bring, but certain that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than either of them could have imagined. The sun was setting as Samuel Barrett and Ayanna rode side by side through the rugged, dry terrain. The air was cooler now, but the weight of the journey ahead still hung heavy on Samuel's shoulders. He had agreed to help Ayanna, though he wasn't sure exactly what he had gotten himself into. He was a rancher, not a soldier or a negotiator. But something about Ayanna's plea had struck him. Her courage and sincerity were undeniable, and for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he felt a deep sense of responsibility for helping her. They rode in silence, the soft thud of their horses' hooves on the dry ground the only sound breaking the stillness. Ayanna led the way, her movements confident, though Samuel could see that there was a sense of sadness in her eyes. Despite her strength, he could tell that her heart was heavy. As they traveled, Samuel began to wonder about the Apache way of life. Before meeting Ayanna, his knowledge of the Apache tribe was limited to what he had heard from other settlers. Most of the stories were about raids and battles, about violence and conflict. But Ayanna didn't seem like the people in those stories. She was kind, determined, and brave, not someone who would seek violence unless it was absolutely necessary. She had risked everything just to ask him for help. Finally, as the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Ayanna spoke, breaking the silence that had settled between them. We're getting close, she said, her voice calm but tense. The Comanches are camped just beyond those hills. Samuel looked ahead. The hills rose steeply in the distance, their jagged edges silhouetted against the fading light. He couldn't help but feel a chill run through him. The Comanches were known for their fierceness. If what Ayanna said was true and her brother was truly being held there, then they were about to step into dangerous territory. Are you sure this is the right way? Samuel asked, his voice low. I don't want to risk you getting hurt. Ayanna turned to him, her face serious. I've been to this camp before, she said. I know where they're keeping him. I can do this. Samuel could see the determination in her eyes. She wasn't afraid. But he knew that didn't mean the situation wasn't dangerous. The Comanches were known to be unpredictable, and they weren't likely to simply hand over an Apache prisoner without a fight. Samuel felt a tight knot in his stomach. You're a brave woman, Samuel said softly, but you don't have to do this alone. We'll face it together. Ayanna gave him a small nod, her face softening for the first time since they had met. Thank you, she said. But I've been raised to be strong. I can't just stand by while my people suffer. Samuel understood. He didn't have the same connection to the Apache tribe that Ayanna did, but he understood the drive to protect one's family and people. He felt a sense of respect for her, more than he had for most people he had met in his life. The journey grew more difficult as they reached the foot of the hills. The terrain was rougher here with sharp rocks and uneven ground, making it hard to maintain a steady pace. Samuel was used to riding through difficult terrain with his cattle, but this was different. He wasn't just moving his herd to a new grazing ground, he was heading into a potentially dangerous situation with little more than his horse and his determination. As they made their way up the slope of the hills, Ayanna pointed to a small cave hidden in the rocks. "That's where they're keeping him," she said. "We can't approach directly, they'll see us if we're too close." Samuel studied the area carefully. The cave was well hidden, and from the way Ayanna spoke, it seemed like it was guarded. He wasn't sure what kind of plan she had in mind, but he knew they would have to be careful. "We'll need to be smart about this," Samuel said. "We don't know how many Comanches are there, or what kind of weapons they might have." Ayanna nodded, her expression serious. "I've seen their camp. There are only a few guards. If we wait until night, we can slip in and get him without being noticed." Samuel didn't like the idea of waiting until dark, but he knew it might be their only chance. The cover of night would give them an advantage. They would be harder to spot, and they could use the shadows to their advantage. So they waited, hiding in the rocks, as the last rays of sunlight disappeared over the horizon. The world around them grew quieter, and the air became cooler. Samuel felt the stillness of the desert, the way it seemed to hold its breath as they prepared to move. As darkness fell, Ayanna turned to him, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "Now," she whispered. They moved swiftly, making their way toward the cave. Samuel's heart was pounding in his chest, but he tried to stay focused. He had to trust Ayanna. She knew this land. She knew what to do, and he had made a promise to her. They approached the cave carefully, staying low to the ground. Samuel could see the faint flicker of firelight from the Comanche camp in the distance, but it was far enough away that they wouldn't be spotted immediately. Ayanna motioned for him to stop, and they crouched down behind a large rock. "The guards are right ahead," Ayanna whispered. "But they won't notice us if we move quickly." Samuel nodded, his breath steady but slow. His fingers gripped the reins of his horse, ready to move at a moment's notice. He had been in tight situations before, but this felt different. This wasn't about cattle or land. This was about a life Ayanna was willing to risk everything for. It made Samuel wonder how far he would go for his own family, his own people. Ayanna took the lead, moving silently through the shadows. Samuel followed closely behind, his senses alert to every sound around him. They reached the entrance to the cave, and Ayanna turned to him, her face serious. "He's inside," she whispered. "We have to hurry." Samuel took a deep breath and nodded. There was no turning back now. Together they crept inside the cave, unaware of what awaited them on the other side. Part 3: The Unlikely Alliance. The cave was dark and cool, the air thick with the scent of earth and stone. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest as he followed Ayanna through the narrow opening. His eyes slowly adjusted to the dim light filtering in from the outside, and he could just make out the shadowy shapes of rocks and the faint outline of a figure sitting against the cave wall. Ayanna motioned for Samuel to stay quiet, her finger pressed to her lips. They moved cautiously, making their way toward the prisoner, whose face Samuel could now see clearly. The man was dressed in the traditional clothes of the Apache, his hair tied back in a simple knot. He looked up as Ayanna approached, his eyes widening with surprise and relief. "Ayanna," he whispered hoarsely. His voice was weak, as if he hadn't spoken much in days. The man's face was covered in dirt and his clothes were torn, but Samuel could see the resemblance to Ayanna. This must have been her brother, just as she had said. He couldn't imagine what she must have felt knowing her brother was trapped here, far from home. "Yes," Ayanna whispered back, her voice filled with both joy and concern. "I'm here, brother. We're getting you out." Samuel stepped forward, glancing nervously over his shoulder to ensure no one was following them into the cave. The last thing they needed was for the Comanches to realize they had come for the prisoner. He could hear the distant crackling of the campfire from outside, but inside the cave, everything was eerily quiet. "We need to move quickly," Samuel said, his voice low but firm. "We don't know how much time we have before the guards realize something's wrong." Ayanna nodded and crouched down beside her brother. She helped him to his feet, her face filled with concern as she checked his injuries. His body was covered in bruises and his wrists were raw from the ropes that had bound him, but despite the physical toll, there was a fire in his eyes. He hadn't given up. "Thank you," the man said weakly to Samuel. I thought I'd never see her again." Samuel gave a small nod, not knowing exactly what to say. He wasn't a hero. He was just a rancher who had gotten caught up in something bigger than himself. But he couldn't turn back now. "We're not out of danger yet," Samuel said, his voice steady. "We need to get you both out of here. Stay close." Ayana's brother, who Samuel now learned was named Tyen, nodded gratefully, though he still looked exhausted. He had clearly been through a lot, and Samuel knew that every step they took would need to be careful. The longer they stayed in the cave, the greater the risk that someone would notice them. They turned to leave the cave, and Ayana led the way, her steps sure and quick. Samuel followed closely behind, keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. The night had grown colder, and the shadows of the hills seemed even more oppressive. It felt like the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The entrance to the cave was just ahead, but as they neared it, Samuel heard something, a soft sound barely audible, but unmistakable. Footsteps, someone was approaching. "Quick!" Samuel whispered urgently. "Get back!" They darted back into the shadows, ducking behind a large rock at the edge of the cave. Ayana's brother stumbled slightly, his legs weak from days of captivity, but Ayana was there to steady him. They held their breath, listening as the footsteps grew closer. Samuel's heart raced. He had no idea who it could be. One of the guards, perhaps, or someone else from the Comanche camp. If they were caught now, all their efforts would have been for nothing. The footsteps stopped just outside the cave. For a long moment, everything was silent. Then the figure spoke. "You should have stayed in the camp," the voice said softly. It was a low, calm voice, not one that sounded particularly threatening, but Samuel knew that didn't mean anything. He couldn't see the figure, but he could feel the danger in the air. Ayana stiffened beside him, and Samuel could see the recognition in her eyes. She turned to him, her face pale in the dim light. "Stay still," she whispered. "Don't make a sound." Samuel nodded, though he wasn't sure what was happening. The figure outside was still, and the silence stretched on. It felt like hours before the footsteps began to retreat, slowly fading into the distance. After a long moment, Ayana let out a soft sigh of relief. "It's him," she said quietly. "One of my people." "He's warning us." "Who?" Samuel asked, his voice barely a whisper. "A scout," Ayana replied. "He's part of the group keeping watch over the Comanche camp. He knew we would come for my brother. He's helping us." Samuel didn't understand everything Ayana was saying, but he trusted her. He had no reason to doubt her now. They waited for a few more minutes, then Ayana gave a quiet signal, and they began to move again, this time with even more caution. The shadows around them seemed to press in closer, and the air felt thicker, as if the world itself was conspiring to keep them from escaping. As they approached the edge of the cave, Samuel felt a sudden, unexpected sense of solidarity with Ayana and her brother. They were all in this together, whether they liked it or not. Ayana had asked him for help, something that wasn't easy for her given the history between their people. And now, here they were working together to survive, to get her brother back to safety. It was strange, Samuel thought. He had never imagined he would be part of such an alliance. He had always been on the outside, watching from a distance, but now he was right in the middle of it. And for the first time in a long while, he felt that what he was doing mattered. They reached the cave entrance, and Ayana peered outside cautiously. The camp was still visible in the distance, but there was no sign of anyone watching them. The scout's warning had bought them some time, but they couldn't afford to waste it. "We're almost there," Ayana whispered. "Just a little further." Samuel nodded, and together they slipped out of the cave and into the night, the cold desert air biting at their skin. But they were free for now. As they made their way down the hill, Samuel couldn't help but think about how much had changed in such a short time. Just hours before, he had been a rancher, focused on his land and his cattle, with little concern for the Apache or their struggles. Now he was part of something larger, something more meaningful. And though he didn't know what would happen next, he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer just an outsider looking in. He was part of something that could change the future. The night had grown colder as Samuel, Ayana, and Tyen moved swiftly through the hills. The stars above twinkled like distant lanterns, offering little comfort in the vast, shadowy landscape. Samuel's thoughts raced, his mind filled with a mix of uncertainty and determination. They were on their way to the Comanche camp now, but with every step, the gravity of what they were about to do weighed heavier on him. The journey had not been easy. After escaping the cave, they had to move quickly, careful not to draw attention to themselves. Every rustling leaf, every crunch of gravel underfoot felt like an alarm in the quiet desert night. But with Ayanna leading the way and Tyen, though weak, staying close behind, Samuel pressed on. He had made a promise to help, and he was not about to turn back now. "We're almost there," Ayanna whispered, breaking the silence that had settled over them. Her voice was calm, but Samuel could sense the tension in it. She had been calm throughout their entire journey. But this was different. This was the moment they had been preparing for, and even the strongest of hearts could not help but feel a little nervous. Samuel nodded, his grip tightening around the reins of his horse. The Comanche camp was just ahead, hidden among a cluster of tall, jagged rocks. From the top of the hill, Samuel could make out the faint glow of firelight. The soft murmur of voices reached his ears, but there was no sign of movement near the camp's entrance. It seemed eerily quiet, as though the Comanches were either unaware of their approach or they were simply waiting for something. Ayanna slowed her pace, signaling for everyone to stop. She turned to Samuel, her face serious, but there was something in her eyes, a glimmer of hope mixed with the weight of responsibility. "Samuel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "this is where I need you to trust me." Samuel didn't respond immediately. He studied her face, wondering what exactly she was asking. He had trusted her up to this point, but he needed to understand what came next. His mind was racing with questions. How would they get Tyen back without causing a fight? How would they approach the Comanche camp without alerting them? The answers weren't clear. Ayanna seemed to sense his hesitation. She stepped closer to him, her voice soft but firm. "We don't want to fight. The Comanches are dangerous, but if we approach them the right way, they will listen." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "How can you be so sure? These aren't just ordinary people we're dealing with. These are warriors." Ayanna looked at him with understanding in her eyes. I know them. I grew up near their camp, and I've seen their ways. They respect strength, but they also respect honor. If we make the right offer, we can get Tyen back without bloodshed." Samuel nodded slowly. He had no experience dealing with the Comanche, but he knew one thing. Ayanna believed in her plan, and that belief was powerful. He had already seen her courage and determination. Now he would have to trust in her judgment. They continued their descent toward the camp, moving as quietly as possible. As they approached the edge of the rocky outcrop, Ayanna motioned for them to stop again. Samuel could see the camp more clearly now. There were tents arranged in a circle, with several Comanche warriors sitting around a fire, talking in low voices. Some were sharpening their weapons, while others seemed to be deep in conversation. Samuel felt the tension rise in his chest. This was it. This was the moment that would decide everything. Ayanna took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the camp. "We need to find the leader," she said softly. "Tahar, he's the one we must speak to. If anyone can negotiate with us, it's him." Samuel glanced at Tyen, who was standing beside Ayanna, his face tense. He had said little since they had escaped the cave, but his presence spoke volumes. This was his family, his people, and he had every reason to be nervous. Samuel could only imagine how it felt to be trapped in a foreign camp, surrounded by enemies, even if it was his own tribe holding him captive. "I'll stay close," Samuel said quietly, his eyes on the Comanche warriors. "But Ayanna, you need to lead this. You know them better than I do." Ayanna nodded, giving him a reassuring smile. "I won't let anything happen to him," she said, her voice filled with determination. Then she turned to Tyen. "Stay here and stay out of sight. We'll bring you back soon." With that, Ayanna stepped forward, walking confidently toward the camp. Samuel stayed behind, watching her every move. His heart was racing, but he had to trust her. This was her world, and he had to follow her lead. Ayanna approached the camp with quiet but purposeful steps. As she neared the fire, the warriors looked up, their expressions hard and unreadable. Ayanna's gaze never wavered as she met the eyes of each of them. They knew who she was, the daughter of the Apache leader, a respected warrior in her own right. "Tahar," Ayanna called softly, her voice cutting through the silence. "I need to speak with you." There was a brief moment of stillness before one of the warriors stood up and stepped toward her. He was tall, with a strong build, his face weathered by years of battles and travel. His eyes were sharp, and his gaze held a mix of curiosity and caution. "You come to speak to the chief?" the warrior asked, his voice deep. Ayanna nodded. "I do. It is urgent." The warrior studied her for a long moment before turning and gesturing for her to follow. He led her to the center of the camp, where the figure of Tahar, the Comanche leader, sat by the fire. He was older than most of the warriors, with graying hair and a long scar running down one side of his face. His presence was commanding, and his eyes were cold as he looked up at Ayanna. "I've come for my brother," Ayanna said, her voice steady but firm. "You have him. I ask that you return him to me." Tahar didn't answer right away. He studied her, his expression unreadable. The fire crackled between them, casting long shadows across his face. "And why should I listen to you?" he asked, his voice low. "You come alone with no warriors, no support? Why should I trust your words?" Ayanna stood tall, her heart pounding, but she met his gaze without flinching. "Because I am the daughter of the Apache chief," she said, "and I know the ways of my people. I have not come to fight. I have come to negotiate." Tahar remained silent, his eyes narrowing as he considered her words. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "Very well," he said, his voice gruff. "I will hear you. But know this. We do not give our prisoners freely. If you want him back, you must offer something in return." Ayanna's heart skipped a beat. She had known this moment would come. She had prepared herself for it, but now that it was here, she had to think quickly. What could she offer the Comanches in exchange for her brother's freedom? "I offer you peace," she said quietly. "I offer you a promise that the Apache and the Comanche will no longer fight, that we will find a way to coexist. If you return my brother." Tahar's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Peace? You ask for something that has been lost for generations, and you offer it so easily." Ayanna held her ground, her voice steady. "It is not easy, but I will do whatever it takes to make peace. Will you accept that offer?" Tahar studied her for a long moment, the silence hanging thick in the air. Then finally he nodded. "I accept." The air felt heavy with the weight of the moment as Ayanna stood before Tahar, her heart beating fast but steady. It was as if the world itself had paused, holding its breath, waiting for the decision that would change everything. Samuel stood a few steps behind her, watching the exchange with silent anticipation. Tyan, hidden among the rocks with his weary eyes trained on the scene, had no idea that his freedom was hanging on the words being spoken now. Tahar, the Comanche leader, gazed at Ayanna with a mixture of respect and curiosity. His gaze was sharp, like a predator watching a challenge, yet there was something else in it, something like the flicker of possibility. He had heard of Ayanna's strength, of the respect she commanded among her people, and now here she was, offering peace where others had only offered conflict. "Peace," Tahar murmured slowly, as if testing the word on his tongue. "For the Apache and the Comanche, you know the history, girl. The blood that has been spilled. The battles fought. You think that can be undone by a promise?" Ayanna didn't flinch. Her eyes were locked on his, unwavering. She had been raised to fight for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. And now, standing before the leader of a tribe that had once been her people's greatest enemy, she was doing the one thing most would call foolish. She was offering peace. "I know the history," Ayanna said firmly, her voice clear and strong. "I've seen the pain, the loss on both sides, but I refuse to believe that the cycle of hate has to continue forever. If we keep fighting, we all lose. If you take my brother back, I will take this message of peace to my people. We can live in harmony, not as enemies, but as neighbors, each with our land, our way of life. But it starts here with you." Tahar was silent for a moment. His expression didn't change, but Ayanna could see the wheels turning in his mind. Peace was an alien concept to him, something that seemed far-fetched after so many years of bloodshed. But he was a leader, and leaders had to think beyond tradition. They had to see the future, not just the past. "You offer me a difficult choice," Tahar finally said, his voice low. "I do not trust your people easily." "You think your chief will accept peace after all that has happened?" Ayanna nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I believe my father will, but we need your help. The old ways of fighting, of living in fear, will not bring us anything but more loss. You know this, Tahar. You are a wise leader. Help me make this change, and we will both be remembered for it." The silence stretched between them. Samuel felt as if the entire desert was holding its breath. The crackling fire, The distant sounds of the night all seemed to fade away as the weight of Ayana's words sank in. Tahar stood slowly, his gaze moving from Ayana to the distant hills where Tyann waited. He studied her for a long time, and in that silence, Samuel could feel the tension mounting. Would Tahar agree? Would he see the value in Ayana's offer? At last, Tahar spoke, his voice steady but filled with a new kind of resolution. I have seen much in my life, war, loss, betrayal, but I also know when something is worth fighting for, and this peace you speak of, it is worth fighting for. You have shown me a different path, Ayana, and I will not ignore it. Ayana's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time, a small but genuine smile broke across her face. She had done it. They had done it. You will have him, Tahar said, his voice carrying authority. Your brother is free. Ayana stepped forward, her heart soaring. But she didn't rush to embrace her brother, not yet. Instead, she turned to Samuel, her eyes filled with gratitude. She had trusted him, and now her trust had paid off. Without his help, none of this would have been possible. Samuel had broken his own traditions, his own boundaries, and had stepped into a world he had never known, simply to help her. Thank you, Ayana said softly, her voice full of emotion. You've given us all a chance. Samuel nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He hadn't expected any of this to happen, but as he watched the scene unfold, he knew he had done the right thing. For the first time in a long while, he felt something more than just the weight of survival. He felt hope, the kind of hope that could change everything. As Ayana turned back to her brother, Tyann stepped forward from his hiding place behind the rocks. His steps were slow, unsteady, but his face was filled with a mix of confusion and hope. He had been so unsure, so frightened during these past few days, but now, standing before his sister, he could see the promise of a new future in her eyes. Ayana, Tyann said softly, his voice weak but filled with relief. I didn't think I'd ever be free again. Ayana rushed to his side, wrapping her arms around him. Samuel stepped back, giving them space. It wasn't his place to interfere in their moment. This was a family reunited, a bond restored, and he was simply a witness to it all. We're free now, Ayana whispered, holding her brother tightly. And so is everyone else. We'll make it right. We'll bring peace. Tahar, standing nearby, watched the reunion with a look of solemn approval. For a long moment no one spoke. There was no need for words. The silence was filled with the understanding that something important had happened here tonight. The Comanche leader had made a choice, one that would shape the future of both his people and the Apache. And in that decision, a new possibility had been born. Samuel watched as Ayana and Tyann stood together, their bond as strong as ever. It was clear that this was only the beginning. There was still work to be done, but this was a first step, a step toward a future where the past didn't have to define them. As the fire crackled softly behind them, Ayana turned to Samuel once more. You don't belong to just one side anymore, Samuel, she said, her voice filled with both gratitude and understanding. You've shown me that there's always another way. And because of you, my brother is free. Because of you, there's hope. Samuel nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He had come to the West to tend to his ranch, to care for his cattle, and to keep his family safe. But now, he had done something far more important. He had helped bring about change, something that would echo across the land for years to come. For the first time, Samuel understood what true peace meant. It wasn't just the absence of war. It was the willingness to break tradition, to see beyond the lines that divided them, and to choose something better. As they stood together, Apache, Comanche, and settler, under the vast, starry sky, the future seemed full of possibilities. And in that moment, Samuel knew that this was only the beginning.